Ladies and gentlemen, it is Wednesday. We are DebateSensei. We got Matt Shapiro, Esquire,
Hello.
all dudded up. We got Tim
Dudded up.
Seavey of San Diego fame.
Fame.
I'm Jared Kubik Miller, debate coach, professor of communications, and we thought we'd talk about something kind of light today. You know what I mean? Just kind of just kick it around a little bit. Just
Yeah.
So
Splash around the puddles of what's going on in the world.
yeah.
Things are happening.
Well, it was inspired by a recent election in Italy. I thought we'd make it a little bit more global, and so that's where I'm going for it. You know what? In fact, let me pull that up. I think it's always good to start with some definitions, right? I mean, and in this case, I think it might be really important.
Luckily, fascism has the most simple definition of any word you will ever hear in your whole life.
I don't know.
And that's a joke because it's like not a simple definition. Let me read you what Merriam-Webster has to say about this. Fascism, a political philosophy, movement, or regime such as the fascisti that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social a word I don't even know. Regimentation. Thank you. Regimentation. And forcible suppression of opposition. Jared, you should totally link that into the thing. That is a big, long word. We could break that up if you wanted to, but
is there a lawyer in the house to break it down for us?
Let me break it down as to what I think that means, okay? Because it's not a simple definition, and I think in a lot of people who have a debate like this probably could spend their entire time debating just the meaning of fascism, because a lot of people, maybe not even I, understand what it means. But what it is a centralized government, a very strong leader, okay? And it doesn't necessarily matter what type of government. Technically speaking, I think you could have a republic, capitalist United States that has a fascist leader. It doesn't necessarily matter the type of government. It matters about how the government's run, whether it be a communist government or a democratic government. And the leader is very strong. And there are undertones of nationalism where, like, you know, our country's the best, and that's held above others, and that can be also, you know, kind of pushed into other prejudices. Like this definition Merriam-Webster talks about of race, holding that the most important group, that they're all part of that fascist group, they are the ones who matter, and they're the ones who, typically will oppress others once in power, to suppress political discourse and kind of shuts down anything but what they're trying to do. Okay, now I'm done.
So, fascism is an expert on fascism, Jason Stanley, points out that
who is in fact a fascist.
Let's not have that recorded on the internet, shall we? Let's officially deny that.
That was a joke. Okay, Tim, that was supposed to be so ridiculous you wouldn't believe it. Tim's like, don't let him know.
That's what the lawyer said to the internet.
But fascism is uniquely a right-wing ideology. There's plenty of bad things that happen in left-wing ideologies as well, but fascism is specifically on the right side of the spectrum. And so when you're talking about nationalism,
right, that was in the right and left, right, yeah.
So I mean, like when you talk about Nazi, that's the Nazi part, nationalism. So the nationalist socialist parties. That's what.
Well, what's really scary is like the true fascist movement, the actual people who walked around and said they are fascist, not in type, but like in unique, in Italy. That's where the most pure form of, fascism existed under Mussolini, who was a man who once lived and was a fascist. And the Nazi German government, whatever that is, did in fact embody maybe a true fascist movement. There are people on the internet who would tell you It's a form of it. It took a lot of credence from it and ran with it in their own way. And that's probably just more of a spectrum.
The Nazis were definitely inspired by Mussolini.
They are. I would argue that you're not being too controversial saying that the Nazi regime was a fascist regime. I think you're safe. I don't think that's. You heard it here. Might be a little controversial, folks, but
there's plenty of fascist movements all across Europe at the time that were taking cues from.
Did they exalt nation and often held one race above others and stood for centralized autocratic government headed by a dictator leader? That sounds like the Nazis to me.
But there was fascist movements in England too, and there was fascist movement in the United States also. So there's like Madison Square Garden held a freaking convention for Nazis. So
we have a definition, and now the question is fascism on the rise? So now
we should probably define what on the rise means.
Sure.
Right? Like
the temperature
more
at
this
your
year than last year, more this decade than last decade.
The temperature is on the rise. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but also because I think that even if you can
Russian military conscription is on the rise. Sorry.
Even if you can make the argument that it's been on the rise for the last 5 or 10 years, is it plateauing? Is it has it hit its high watermark and now it's going to recede? Or that's the question. I think that's where I'm wondering. There was a lot of stuff that was happening, especially 5 years ago. That oh my God, everyone seems to be moving nationalist. You know what I mean? And so that's the sort of predecessors of fascism. And now I'm wondering, is that movement still got steam? Is it slowing down? Has it plateaued? Where is it going to, all across the world? You know what I mean? It's just all across the world. Everything's happening at the same time, So.
Yeah, it's I think a byproduct of, so on the neg, first of all, just to be the ground would be either it's not on the rise, meaning it's even, or it could also say it's going down.
Right. I would also argue that it does not have to be. I don't know that you can do a poll of all fascists raise your hand. I think that would probably be very difficult to quantify. So I think on the neg, I would probably do a decent amount of data skepticism, and I think the amount of fascist.
You know who knows is Mark Zuckerberg.
The amount of groups being labeled as fascists, or the reporting of this is becoming fascist, definitely higher, right? So I think when the term fascism is thrown around a whole lot more, that may make it seem as if fascism is on the rise, when maybe in actuality there are fewer, but they might be just louder, small groups, right? So louder fringe groups that maybe make it appear as more on the rise. If I were on the neg, that's maybe a direction that I would start taking it, of the amount of coverage that goes to the Westboro Baptist Church. Right.
I don't know how you could use this.
You know what I mean?
Oh, sorry. I don't know how one thing I think is the news, the outcry in social media, or an outcry is a weird word, but the showing of things that are labeled in some degree to be fascist in nature with regard to the modern, politics of the day, including the presidential candidates, it's louder now. And because of the internet and YouTube and all of the ways you can tweet somebody today, it's loud. You can see it. You can click on people's names or organizations that are posting stuff that, in a different world, if you didn't, in the world of total ignorance of not knowing what anyone thought, it would kind of not appear, whether the numbers stayed the same or not, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's louder now. You can see more people saying these things or doing these things. And now the question is that outpour of information increasing the numbers? You'd think you'd be able to just get statistics on that, but I don't know. Probably not. Like you said, Tim, no one's raising their hand for that.
I'd suggest that maybe you have to look at characteristics of fascism. And like that guy Jason Stanley, he published like a 10-point sort of list of things that identify what is and is not fascist. So I like if we're going to lay out a criteria, it's kind of a long and involved criteria, but still it's a pretty good one. You know what I mean? It's like because it's grounded in literature and this person's an expert on it. And so let's talk about a few of those. All right. So some characteristics of fascism and see if we're seeing it across like the world or anything like that. One of the things he points out in order to be fascist is that there has to be this mythic past. All right, that like we used to be really great, and that's what the Nazis were talking about. That's why it's called the Third Reich, right? Because there was a Second Reich when they were, so they were trying to establish a Third Reich and create this new sort of, empire that they had in the past. So it's like if you have, and so that's like the, let's be great again type of statement.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna say it, but yeah, that sounds like something we've heard before.
No, I mean we now just say what it is. I mean, the criticisms of the "I'm the only person who can save you" mentality in in Donald Trump is there has been lots of people talking to some degree, drawing comparisons to him and fascist leaders and the scapegoating of problems. That's a big thing, all the the historical examples will have the dictator saying, the reason why we have these problems is X. And X is some arbitrary, often group of people.
That's the propaganda. So it's
Right.
like propaganda that has a friend-enemy sort of component to it.
The propaganda without opposition. I mean, like they suppress the other side. They want to prevent people from speaking out against them. On top of what Jared, you're specifically saying,
especially
controlling the narrative.
Yeah, especially like experts, which is the third part, which is anti-intellectualism. So if experts come up and start talking about things, they're kind of like, no, like they're
anti-science. I mean,
if anyone who comes up with some sort of scientific expert explanation for it, they're completely denounced as somebody who's trying to harm everything. The next one is unreality, that the truth doesn't matter, or that the leader is the only one that has the truth or is able to tell you the truth. The next one is hierarchy, that there's us and them.
America first.
Yeah, we are better than them. Those leftists are trying to take your stuff.
We should prioritize ourselves is kind of and ourselves is some group. I mean, we only have history as examples, but you can imagine it could be any type of group.
And then there's victimhood, where you are the victim of this sort of movement. Like they're coming after your stuff. They're trying to take your stuff, and that's unfair, and it doesn't belong to you. And then the leader can never.
They're taking our gerbs. You know what I'm saying?
The leader can never violate the law. These are like above the law. Anything he says or thinks is the law. You know what I mean? And so stuff like that. There's a few more that start getting into like sexual anxiety and the rural urban divide and stuff like that. But like those categories, I think, like outline sort of a fascist mentality. And so the question is that sort of overall mentality more and more popular amongst the world's leaders?
Interesting. When was this published? Out of curiosity, when did
he's still putting stuff out? I mean, he's been writing articles as 2021. That book in particular might have been a few years prior to that, so it's within the last 5 years.
Okay, so that therein lied a little bit of the challenge for me. Like I'm interested in a definition that maybe is I don't know. The earlier the definition, maybe the better, because I feel like if it is too easily crafted off of common problems, I feel like it's not that this gentleman is incorrect or anything. Like, he was an expert on the subject. Obviously, I'm saying, like, I feel like it is easier to craft a theory to meet a listing or of elicitation of common problems than it is to say, like, all right, here's an objective or as close to an objective definition of this, like, throughout history. let's see if it applies to the modern, right?
But, like, to be fair, like all this stuff incorporated the historical examples. Like most of his stuff is derived from what Hitler did and Mussolini did and the fascist movements did.
I don't have as much knowledge of the historical actions and things of the Nazis, like what they did on a, what their propaganda sounded like, for example, to be able to draw those comparisons. I only have my own experience with news and things, mostly in the U.S. So I'm interested
with all those fascist groups that he hangs out with and gets propaganda from.
Right, all the fascist news organizations, right?
On Thursdays.
So that's an interesting definition there, and I think you can then start pulling in some articles talking about where like Venezuela is pushing significantly more in a fascist direction and probably meets many of those criteria. Some people even saying like far right but still democratic groups within Sweden, where like their kind of political system requires them to formalize a government, like they have to meet a quorum, I guess, or they have to get enough people. I think it's more similar to like Parliament, like there needs to be a plurality of wins for one party to hold power, and if they don't, it goes back to referendum. And like it's when it's at that point of like when they're re-deliberating, it seemed like more extreme right groups. But it's still funny to me to even imagine like Sweden, they're still like democratic, but they're just far right Democrats. And like I just picture like all Scandinavian policy as like the most lefty dream. And so I find that to be a little bit funny, but it's certainly not funny if like people being hurt and whatever, but just like, what does a Swedish fascist sound like? That seems
right near there, right near this, the Scandinavian peninsula, Denmark has the Danish.
There's a joke in there, Tim.
And the Danish People's Party got like over 25% of the vote, and they are clearly a nationalist fascist party. They don't call themselves fascist, but it's like our country for our people.
Yeah, so therein lies, like, I'm interested in just, if no group is calling themselves fascist, like, I feel like groups are for the most part, not outing themselves as fascist. So then it's trickier of just, is this name calling from, opposition groups, where I think it's very easy for leftist groups that don't want to engage with the topic to call something fascist, the same way that righty policies that don't want to engage with the actual merits of most, like, liberal policies, like, oh, that's just socialist, that's communist nonsense, it's easier to apply a heuristic label with a whole bunch of political and historical bad weight to it than it is to actually engage with.
That's what fascist is now, what you just described. Like, it is just like this word that I don't even think most people, not most people, but honestly, probably most people, they don't even understand what it means. Ironically enough, one of the things that was just criticized by Joe Biden was they were saying he was a fascist for having a speech in a red backdrop with Marines behind him. And they were saying, that's a fascist. Look at him. He's like being a fascist. And so
communist.
Well, he's a commie fascist. Okay. See, there's different types of, it's a big onion. There's layers. There's layers.
Address that real quick, because it always kind of bugs me when people are like, you are a communist and a fascist. Like, those are two
good day, sir.
Ends of like
those are
fascists.
Well, no, you can be the government can be hijacked by a fascist. I mean, that's how I see it. Like any form of government can become fascist. Like, I think even in like Mao China, where like there's like that's a communist government, yes, but it wasn't run by a guy who wasn't trying to be a dictator with trying to just oppress everyone. It was written like that was his. It went, and because of that, if someone wasn't trying to do that, I guess technically it wouldn't be fascist. Okay, but the fact that it's communist doesn't mean it can't be fascist. The fact that it's capitalist or
like, his fascism is by definition a right-wing philosophy.
Well, no, but the type of government can exist. Right and left can exist in a communist government. Right and left could exist in no? Okay, fine. Then it can't.
At least
I'm proven wrong.
We're talking about definitions there, where like the political spectrum of conservative to liberal, right? So you have your authoritarian, I don't remember the up and down, authoritarian and libertarian, conservative, liberal. Like, those are your two axes, right? Like on the political spectrum. And so you can label the corners of like, socialist is, or a communist group is the very farthest edge on the Right. So I think you can have, Matt, I think what you're getting is you can still have an extremely authoritarian communist group, or you can also have an
Yes.
extremely authoritarian fascist group. Those two being the opposite ends of the left-right axes. Like that's your x-axis, right? Your y-axis is authoritarian. So you can still have an extremely authoritarian socialist group.
So one of the things that distinguishes communism from fascism is that fascists are trying to return to earlier sort of like greatness, whereas communists are trying to move forward to new greatness, right? They're trying to create something different. You can have atrocities that are committed by communist leaders. I think that's what you're talking about. It's like, yeah, you can have horrible leftist communists that kill lots of people with their policies or you know, put them in gulags and stuff like that. But fascists are trying to return the nation to their previous glory. All right.
The heyday.
Yeah. So, and that's like a major distinction between the two. And so that's why Mao wasn't trying to return China to its previous glory. It's trying to build a new communist utopia, and he did that with a whole lot of death. You know, so yeah.
I would be interested, actually, just since it's illuminating to me, more differences between those two. So I liked your guy with his 11 points. What more of those are useful differentiators that like could be used by a super authoritarian figure, but could not be used by a communist authoritarian figure? Because that's, I think, a useful differentiator. I think where oftentimes people will mean authoritarian but they say fascist, or they'll mean authoritarian and they'll say communist. But those are really not the right terms to be applying here.
Well, I think trying to divide people within the country, like it might happen both ways. You know, I mean, I think Stalin was definitely doing that with creating division. Like a lot, his policies that killed millions and millions of people due to hunger was because he didn't like certain regions. And I'm not a historian on this one particular aspect.
Ukraine.
Right?
He
but
took
in
all
general,
the
there has to be this sort of like us them thing, whereas communists are like, we are all together on this, right? Whereas and not only that, but fascists usually rely on capitalist structures. The Nazis weren't nationalizing a whole bunch of stuff. I might be wrong about some of those things, but there was a lot of relying on corporations to get their stuff built and things like that. That they had Volkswagen that was building their cars for them and
Mercedes Benz and
yeah,
Armani making their SS.
Don't
jackets.
they make some great
I
cars?
only learned that. That's why the SS looked like such incredible villains, and like those jackets are still such a big deal, is because Armani made them. Did not know that.
Like Nazis killed socialists. Like they rounded them up and murdered them. Like they were enemies. Like
fake news.
Yeah, and so like it always kind of irks me. It's kind of like, oh, you're a socialist fascist. I'm like, yeah,
those things are
yeah,
opposite.
Those are in conflict with each other.
Okay, so like the collectivist may be another differentiator there.
Collectivist.
Say it again.
Yeah,
Say it again. What did you say?
You're individualists versus collectivists. So like everyone gets the exact same thing. Communist left end of the spectrum versus like everyone fight for what you've got. Don't let anyone take your thing. Everyone for themselves. Maybe the furthest right. And so just trying to differentiate these two, because I think that can certainly help, where like there is significantly more, at least, looking at US things, there's a lot more left socialist type policies being passed of like, this is for much greater good, and it's to benefit the largest number of people. It's
to benefit our group. There's a group. There's always like a unique
That's the hierarchy
group.
part. That's the hierarchy.
Right.
But there is one thing. We're getting like 5 minutes left. One argument that I was thinking that it's on the rise. If you made the argument about how many people are living under fascist ideologies, and I can
like in countries that are led by fascist ideologies. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Okay. And so China and India, just the two biggest ones. You know what I mean? Xi Jinping and Modi from India, and both of them have, like, Xi Jinping has made it so he gets to rule indefinitely. Actually had a constitutional amendment drawn up so term limits don't apply to him anymore. All right, and so that's one thing. Modi was, the leader of like the Hindu national sort of movement in India, and it's like really big on like consolidating Hinduism and nationalism within these things, and that takes care of like a quarter of the
2
population.
billion people.
Yeah, easy, right? Like pushing 3.
Yeah. So
Okay.
like,
Yeah, there's
that might
large
be my
number
first
there.
one, and then Russia, and then like like all, and not only that, but like they like Russia invaded Ukraine.
And this is my example too. Like Russia, what type of government
Yeah, see,
does Russia
that's what
operate
starts
under, Jared?
to feel really
Jared,
tricky, right? Where it's like,
what type of government is Russia
Oligarchy.
allegedly?
Or kleptocracy,
Well,
you might want to
okay,
say.
but like, there's a government. I realize that you're saying it's all a sham, but like,
Democracy.
I think the People's Republic of China.
It's a
I don't think
democracy.
anyone would
Okay,
dispute
okay.
that, like, it is definitely a communist party.
What I'm saying
maybe I'm
is,
wrong. Like maybe people
this
are
is where-
disputing that. Like I don't know that it's fair to say if we are contending that fascism and communism are opposite ends of the spectrum, then is Xi Jinping
Right.
diametrically opposed to the party that rules, or like to the political structure that rules his country? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that's what and that's what like Matt was talking about before. Where it's kind of like, well, you could have a communist system. It's like, well, if he's doing things like removing these, changing the Constitution so he gets to be the dictator of all time, are they communist anymore?
No, once again, though, that we're just saying that makes them more authoritarian. Like they can still be full left, but just they move up the y-axis of.
Let's
more
go back to the big H.
That's
Let's go
not
back to the big
necessarily
H,
the same
right?
thing as more fascist, though.
I think that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Adolf Hitler. He tried to seize Adolf Hitler. He tried to seize power like a true coup d'état originally, and it failed.
No.
He got stop. Let me
Democratically
speak, please.
elected.
He tried and went to jail,
Okay.
and then he writes a book, and then he realizes, I mean, in the biographies, whatever, that like he has to use the system. He has to play by the rules to get to the power. He can't just go kill 4 people and get to the power. He needs to use the electoral process to get into the power. And then once he's in, he does change things. That's true. And Jared, to your point, I mean, you're right. I guess once this poison, I will call it a poison, gets into the heads of a government, no matter what type of government it is, I'm just saying that like a fascist group in any country, which isn't in, let's just say, true consolidated power mode, they're operating in that system of government as best as they can to get power legitimately, and they may be doing it.
Yeah,
they may be doing it illegitimately as well. But my point is just the great fascist leaders and the countries today that you look at that say,
heard it here, folks.
you heard it here, folks. They come to power through normal means. Like typically speaking, it's not a violent war. It's a takeover by election. I mean, or however they have to get into power. So they operate in those, whatever system they're in. They can operate. It's not dependent, and it can't be all messed up.
My question is China moving from communism to fascism? Right? Is India moving from democracy to fascism? And so, like, there's a lot of.
So here's an interesting question then. Still, if fascism represents the most extreme end, the furthest point on the x-axis of socialist to fascist, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you call it liberal to conservative, right? If the most extreme version of liberal is communist, the most extreme version of conservative is fascist. Is it fair to say they're moving towards fascism? Like, well, yeah, the same as like a country that moves a little bit left is moving towards communism.
I wouldn't think that's fair to say conservative is capitalist. Like they I don't know. Maybe we have a disagreement. I don't know.
Well, so what I'm getting at is like, is maybe a more fair question might be like, is the world becoming more conservative? Yeah, I think that's like probably.
I
really
wouldn't say
fair to
conservative is synonymous with fascism, though. I mean,
No, it's not.
I
What
think
I'm
that's a
getting is
jump.
the spectrum has a name, and it is the liberal to conservative spectrum, right? So if you look at the political spectrum, that it's X and Y axis, right? The X axis is the liberal to conservative, with the most extreme ends having the labels of conservative and of communist and fascist. That's not to say that like everyone on there is a little bit more, like I suppose you could say like a little bit more fascist. That's not really fair. It's the most extreme end. So I think you need to be exhibiting the most extreme characteristics of that end in order to deserve the title fascist, right?
I think that's fair.
Yeah, so I think that's where a lot of the name calling ends up getting a little bit ridiculous. Like a more left policy gets called communist, a more right policy gets called fascist. So we need to really operate within those 11 premises that you laid out of this defines fascism, and the more of those boxes that are checked, then we can say, all right, this is at the most extreme right to be called
not
that.
enough to
Otherwise,
say
you got to
that
move
they're
through a huge spectrum to get there.
Matt's right. It's not enough just to say that they're conservative, because conservatives are big spectrum.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, scale, right?
Yeah.
I would not I could be wrong, but I kind of think of it like this: anywhere on that right-left spectrum, you could have a person who is very fascistic, who thinks our group should be in charge and these people should be quiet, and we should like it could be Bernie Sanders, okay? You know what I mean? Like, but Bernie doesn't want to like suppress the other side, like that, like it just because Bernie's a good guy doesn't mean anyone who has Bernie Sanders ideas couldn't technically be a very fascistic person. Like I don't necessarily see the fascist part being tied to right or left necessarily. I think it's more about like when someone gets so radicalized to think that their group, whatever that group is, should just like destroy the other side and like stop them and also
when one side is defined by like nationalism, that's fascist. Okay, so like but
where does nationalism fall on Tim's scale? Nationalism doesn't fall on Tim's right-left liberal conservative scale. Nationalist is on that same scale. Like I feel like you could be.
That is a characteristic that defines more conservative policy. Like more conservative policies are more nationalist.
This is an interesting conversation, fellas.
Yeah,
right. Like, I mean, that's where like there's a whole spectrum of conservatism that some characteristics, right, like smaller government, right, is another defining feature of conservatism. That like the left would not agree with smaller government; they would say more government, right? But that tends to also fall along the authoritarian libertarian spectrum. So we have two axes that we're trying to follow here, and it's not the case that like I believe in my country means you are all the way on one side or that you are all the way authoritarian. It's just the more of that, it seems like the characteristics that Jared laid out, if those are best used to define fascism as a whole, then like once you've checked all 11 boxes, say you have now reached the farthest endpoint of that x-axis into fascism, where along the way it was just conservatism until you checked enough of the boxes that you get there.
Hey Jared, how Jared just spawned in Halo 3. You guys notice that?
What's that? Oh, is that what that is?
Your background?
I think so. And
Jared's at Dre's house recording his new hip hop album.
Well, I think we've got two useful things to throw up in the show notes, and those are the political spectrum on its X and Y axes, so that can be useful reference material, and also the 11 facets of fascism that your expert published there. I think those are useful additional readings that we can start digging through.
So, all right. Hey, we're over time because it was a good discussion. All right, everybody?
Sure was. We learned
We'll be here next week, first week of October, and we'll get started on a deep dive on some Harley topic. All right? All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.